It was the early morning light seeping through the curtains that first betrayed her. Megan stirred, reaching out to shut off her alarm before it could wake Tom, her husband, still sound asleep on the other side of the bed. She moved quietly, slipping into the hallway and closing the door gently behind her. These mornings were hers alone, hidden moments she cherished even though they required near superhuman effort to pull off without disrupting the delicate balance of their lives. Today, however, there was something else in her eyes, a glint of determination, something she'd been nurturing in silence. This was Megan's third week of nursing school, a fact she had kept buried beneath layers of quiet smiles and patient nods. She was balancing the world's expectations on one hand and her dreams on the other, a feat requiring every ounce of her resilience. But to Tom, her secret was beginning to feel like distance, a distance he neither understood nor appreciated. 3 weeks ago, after a night of restless pacing, Megan had enrolled in night classes. She had always dreamed of working as a nurse, of finding purpose beyond the walls of their house. But her dream had faded over the years, replaced by family, children, and unending responsibilities. For a long time, she had convinced herself it was enough, and yet, the yearning never truly left her, whispering to her as she washed dishes, folded laundry, and kissed her children goodnight. But Tom's dismissive response each time she broached the topic was a sting she couldn't ignore, his scoffing words echoing in her mind as she sat at her desk at night, poring over textbooks she didn't know if she'd ever get to put into practice. Just then, Tom entered the kitchen, his face weary from a long week at work. His glance slid over Megan with a hint of something she couldn't quite place, a suspicion simmering in his gaze. "Are you up early again?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. "You've been distracted lately." Megan's hand froze on the handle of the coffee pot. She offered a quick smile, brushing off his tone. The tension in the house grew quietly, almost imperceptibly, creeping into the corners like shadows that Megan and Tom both tried to ignore. Tom would catch her in brief moments, her eyes red-rimmed from studying late, her hands shaking slightly as she handed him his coffee in the morning, her gaze far away as she sat across from him at dinner. Though she tried to hide her exhaustion, the evidence was mounting, and Tom's suspicions gnawed at him like a persistent ache. One Saturday morning, as Megan was rushing out the door, Tom decided he couldn't let it go any longer. He blocked her path in the hallway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes dark with a tension she hadn't seen before. "You're leaving again?" he asked, his voice barely masking an edge of irritation. Megan's heart skipped a beat. She felt a wave of panic, but she hid it behind a forced smile. "Just going to pick up a few things," she said quickly, sidestepping him. But Tom's hand shot out, gripping her arm gently but firmly. There was something almost desperate in his gaze as he searched her face. "Where are you really going, Megan?" he asked, his voice low. He wasn't angry, but there was a deep sadness there, one that startled her. She felt a pang of guilt twist in her chest, but held her ground. "Tom, it's just personal," she murmured, looking away. "Personal?" Tom let out a soft, humorless laugh. "You think I haven't noticed? The late nights, the early mornings, the bags under your eyes. You're hiding something from me, and I think I deserve to know what it is." For a split second, Megan considered telling him everything, but the memory of his dismissive words, his scoffing dismissal of her dream, rose up like a wall between them. Instead, she took a breath, steadying herself. "Tom, I'm not doing anything that should worry you. Please, just trust me." But Tom's trust was already wavering, and Megan could feel it slipping further away with each passing day. They moved through the house like strangers, an invisible wall thickening between them with every hidden hour Megan spent at her night classes, every secret shift she took at the hospital for hands-on training. And yet she couldn't give up. This dream, this purpose, felt like the one thing keeping her anchored, the one thing she was finally doing for herself. One evening, as Megan was slipping her nursing uniform into her bag, her daughter, Emily, peeked into her room. "Mom, why are you always going out so late?" Emily asked, her young face crinkling with curiosity. Megan's heart skipped again, but this time with a different ache. She knelt down, brushing a hand through her daughter's curls. "Mommy's just working on something important," she whispered, offering a small smile. "One day, I hope you'll understand." Emily nodded, satisfied for now, but Megan knew her children were starting to notice her absence too. She felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her, the silent sacrifices she was making carving lines of worry deeper into her face. And though she never complained, never asked Tom for help, she was painfully aware of the toll it was taking on her family. It was on one such night, as she left the house under the guise of running errands, that Tom decided he couldn't take it anymore. He followed her. At first, he thought he was overreacting. He told himself he just needed peace of mind, a confirmation that she wasn't lying to him about something far worse. But as he trailed her car through the city streets, his mind ran wild with doubts. He knew his suspicions weren't fair, that she had always been a devoted wife and mother. But the distance, the secrecy, it had worn down his trust, leaving him feeling helpless, almost desperate for answers. When Megan pulled into the parking lot of a nearby hospital, Tom's confusion deepened. He watched her slip out of the car, her face drawn and weary, her steps purposeful as she headed inside. Puzzled, Tom parked a safe distance away and waited. The minutes stretched into hours. And when Megan finally emerged close to dawn, wearing scrubs, he felt the pieces fall into place in a rush that left him breathless. He followed her home, stunned into silence, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Had she been working at the hospital all this time? And why? Hadn't she mentioned her nursing dreams years ago? He could hardly remember. It had seemed so trivial back then. But now, faced with this secret life she'd been nurturing under his nose, he realized just how much he'd missed, just how deeply he'd underestimated her dreams. The next morning, as Megan entered the kitchen, her eyes hollow from lack of sleep, Tom was waiting. She froze when she saw him, her pulse quickening. "Tom," she began. But he shook his head, stopping her with a look that was equal parts hurt and wonder. "All this time," he said slowly, "you've been working, studying. I had no idea." Megan took a breath, feeling the weight of her secret lift, if only a little. "I didn't want to burden you," she said quietly. "You didn't think it was worth it, so I thought maybe I'd just do it on my own." Tom felt a pang of guilt at her words, a painful reminder of the dismissive remarks he'd made, the cold barrier he'd unknowingly placed between them. He reached out, taking her hand in his voice soft. "Megan, I didn't understand. I never meant to make you feel like this." But even as he spoke, he realized how little he truly knew about the woman he'd married, the sacrifices she had been willing to make for the sake of her family. And as Megan looked back at him, a small, uncertain smile on her lips, Tom felt the stirrings of a profound, unsettling realization. He had been given a glimpse into a world he'd never bothered to see before, a glimpse that might just change everything between them. Tom's newfound understanding was a fragile thing, wavering under the weight of old habits and unspoken regrets. He wanted to make it right, to prove to Megan that he was ready to support her, but he didn't know how. She was still moving through her days with the same quiet determination, her routine unbroken, her dreams pursued without a word to him. Every night he lay awake, wondering how he had missed it all. The fatigue in her face, the ambition in her heart, and most painfully, her disappointment in him. He wanted to reach her, to bridge the chasm he'd created, but guilt kept him silent. One late afternoon, Tom's patience finally snapped. He had just returned from work when he found Megan sitting at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hand trembled slightly as she rubbed her temples. The sight struck him deeply, cutting through his helplessness like a shard of glass. "Megan," he said, his voice more forceful than he intended, "you don't have to keep doing this alone. Let me help you." Megan looked up, startled, her gaze wary and uncertain. "Help me? Tom, I've been managing fine on my own," she replied, her tone defensive, almost dismissive. "No, you haven't," he countered, softer now but firm. "You've been sacrificing so much, Megan, and I can see it now. I didn't understand before, but I do now. Please let me in." There was a moment's silence. the weight of their unspoken past pressing down on them both. Megan's eyes softened, and for the first time, she let her exhaustion show. She took a deep breath, her voice a whisper. "Tom, you have no idea how hard this has been. I wanted this dream for myself. Yes, but I also wanted to prove that I could do it. Even if you didn't think I could." Tom's face fell as her words sank in. "Megan, I never meant—" Just then, their conversation was interrupted by the blaring ring of Megan's phone. She glanced at it and saw the hospital number flashing on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat, dread pooling in her stomach. I have to take this," she whispered, her voice faltering as she answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Megan, we have a critical shortage tonight and one of our nurses just called out. I know you're technically still in training, but would you be able to fill in?" the supervisor asked, sounding hesitant, knowing it was a big request. Megan's mind raced, the exhaustion gnawing at her bones clashing with her dedication. "Yes," she heard herself say before she could second-guess it. "I'll be there as soon as I can." Tom looked at her, concerned. "Megan, you're exhausted. Can't they find someone else?" "No, Tom. They need me," she said, slipping into her coat and grabbing her keys. But just before she walked out the door, she paused, turning back to him with an expression that was both vulnerable and resolute. "Tom, this is important to me. I need you to understand that." And with that, she left, leaving him standing alone in the quiet of their home, feeling more powerless than ever. At the hospital, Megan threw herself into her work, pushing through her fatigue. She knew she was walking a tightrope between her limits and her determination, but something deep within her wouldn't allow her to stop. Her shift blurred into an endless series of tasks, monitoring vitals, assisting with emergencies, holding the hands of patients who needed comfort. As she moved from one patient to the next, her exhaustion seemed to fade, replaced by a clarity and purpose she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she felt truly alive, a part of something larger than herself. Back at home, Tom sat at the edge of their bed, staring at the clock as hours passed. Each tick of the clock was a reminder of how much he had taken her presence for granted, of how many nights he had sat here, oblivious to her struggle. He felt the urge to go to the hospital, to be near her, to see this world she had been living in alone. Unable to shake the feeling, he grabbed his keys and headed out. At the hospital, Tom found himself in a world that was bustling with energy and urgency. Nurses and doctors moved swiftly through the halls, voices murmuring, machines beeping. He asked the receptionist if he could see Megan, his wife, a nurse in training, but was told she was busy in the emergency department. He waited in the hallway, the sterile smell of antiseptic sharp in his nose, his heart pounding as he tried to imagine Megan in this environment. He was sitting there when a doctor emerged, pushing a patient's bed down the hall, and behind the doctor was Megan. She looked up, her gaze landing on him, and for a moment, surprise flickered across her face. But she quickly turned back to her patient, her focus unwavering as she helped guide the bed through the doors of a nearby ward. Tom watched her, captivated. He saw a version of her he had never seen before, confident, steady, purposeful. She moved with a grace and strength that left him in awe. Later, when she finally emerged from her duties, she found him waiting in the corridor.
Hey there, quick message. Grab a paper, write down HeroKind Stories, our channel name. Come back soon, we've got incredible stories you won't want to miss.
"Tom," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. What are you doing here?" He took a step toward her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and regret. "Megan, I had to see it for myself. I had to see you." His voice broke slightly, the weight of his words hanging between them. "I didn't know how much this meant to you, how much you mean." Megan's eyes softened, but her exhaustion still pulled at her. "Tom, this is who I am," she said, her voice steady. "This is what I've always wanted. I need you to see that." He nodded, his throat tight. "I see it now. And I'm sorry, Megan. I'm so sorry for not supporting you sooner." But even as he spoke, a beeping sound cut through the air, a signal that one of her patients needed her. Megan gave him a small smile. "I have to go back," she said, nodding toward the ward. Tom felt a surge of pride as he watched her turn, her steps purposeful as she returned to her duty. He saw her now, not just as his wife, but as a woman with dreams, strength, and a fierce commitment he had underestimated for far too long. And as she disappeared around the corner, Tom felt the weight of his own transformation settle in. He had come here for answers, but he was leaving with a new purpose: to be the husband she deserved, the one who would stand by her side, not only in their home, but in this part of her life that mattered so much. In that moment, he made a silent vow to never let her feel alone in her dreams again. The next few weeks brought a profound, if subtle, change to their lives. Tom was like a new man, more attentive and present, his actions quietly speaking to his newfound commitment. He began to take over some of the household duties without being asked, handling the children's routines, cooking dinner on the nights Megan had class, and even helping with Emily's science project. It was as if he was making up for years of unspoken neglect, a silent promise stitched into each small gesture. Megan, though still wary, noticed his efforts. She watched as he volunteered to drive the kids to soccer practice, or how he would greet her at the door when she returned, often with a hot meal waiting. She felt the weight of her own defenses slowly lifting, her heart inching toward trust once more. Yet a lingering question remained. Did he truly accept this part of her life? Or was he simply appeasing her for the moment? One Saturday, Tom surprised her by showing up at the hospital with the children. Megan's supervisor had arranged a special family day for the nurses' families, hoping to help bridge the gap between the demanding shifts and the lives waiting for them at home. Megan had hesitated to invite Tom, unsure if he'd understand the atmosphere or even feel comfortable in it. But here he was, standing in the lobby with Emily and Jake, their faces lighting up as they saw her. "Mom!" Emily squealed, running to Megan and wrapping her arms around her waist. "Dad said we could see where you work." Megan looked up at Tom, her surprise evident, but he just smiled, gesturing with a shrug. "I thought it was about time," he said, his tone soft but genuine. As they walked through the halls, Megan showed them the basics: the nurses' station, the exam rooms, the break room where she would often catch a few minutes of rest between shifts. The children looked around with fascination, while Tom's gaze held a new depth, a quiet respect she hadn't seen before. When they reached the pediatric wing, where Megan had been doing most of her training, she introduced the kids to some of her young patients. Emily's eyes sparkled as she listened to one little boy tell stories of his love for comic books, and Jake was quick to share his knowledge of superheroes. Tom, too, found himself drawn into the small room, bending down to listen as one child told him about the bravery awards Megan gave out to those who were feeling brave. The moment felt surreal to Megan. Watching her family weave into this part of her life she had once kept hidden. She felt the delicate threads of her world coming together, blending the home she cherished with the work she loved. Later, as they prepared to leave, Tom lingered back. He turned to Megan, his expression serious but full of warmth. "Megan, I don't know if I ever really understood what it is that you do here, but seeing you with these kids, seeing how much they look up to you, it's incredible." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "You're incredible." Megan felt a surge of emotion she hadn't expected, a relief she hadn't allowed herself to feel. "Tom, thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude and surprise. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly, and for the first time she saw that look in his eyes. The realization that she wasn't just his wife, but a woman who had dreams and a purpose of her own. That night, as they lay in bed, Tom turned to her in the darkness. "Megan, there's something I want to ask you," he murmured, his tone hesitant yet earnest. She shifted, sensing the weight in his words. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "You've always supported me, stood by me while I built my career, but I want to do that for you now. I don't want you to feel alone in this. I want to be by your side, however I can, if you'll let me." The words hung in the air, filling the room with a quiet power. Megan's heart swelled as she absorbed his words. the sincerity behind them. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that, Tom." From that moment on, they became true partners in every sense. Tom encouraged her through every late-night study session, brought her coffee during her early shifts, and even rearranged his own work schedule to match her days off. He became her unwavering support, just as she had been for him for so many years. And as Megan continued her work at the hospital, she found herself thriving, not just as a nurse, but as a wife, a mother, and, most importantly, as herself. Her confidence blossomed in ways she hadn't imagined, her steps surer, her gaze brighter. She no longer carried the weight of her dream alone. Instead, she walked beside a man who had finally seen her for all that she was. Their journey was far from perfect. There were days when the balance wobbled, when the old frustrations and doubts would creep back in. But together, they faced each challenge with the quiet strength they had built through years of shared sacrifices and rediscovered love. One evening, after Megan had been awarded a commendation from the hospital for her dedication, Tom took her hand in his, pride shining in his eyes. "You did it, Megan. You're living your dream," she smiled, squeezing his hand. "We did it, Tom. You were part of this too." As they walked out of the hospital together, their hands entwined, they knew they had found something precious, not just the resilience to follow their dreams, but the strength to support each other's journey, wherever it would take them. If you enjoyed Megan and Tom's story, remember to subscribe to HeroKind Stories for more inspiring tales that celebrate the power of love and resilience. Share this story with friends and family who might need a reminder of the strength we find in each other. And don't go anywhere. Another story of courage and kindness is waiting for you on the screen. Click to watch and stay with us for more unforgettable journeys.